A few weeks before his time came to an end, Oliver Tree was talking about what would happen after he was gone. It was a strange conversation for a 32-year-old musician to be having. His latest album had just been released. The biggest tour of his career was about to begin. New projects were underway, and by every outward measure, his future looked bright. Yet during an interview in April 2026, Oliver explained that he had already made plans for his estate. "I don't believe that any of the wealth or the things that get made from it is mine," he said. "The idea is, when I die, all the money is going to go back to artists." He was referring to a foundation he had created called Dr. Oliver Tree's Art Grants for Baby Geniuses. The goal was simple. Long after his career ended, the money generated by his music would continue helping future artists create their own work. Then he made a joke. "When I die, my art will continue to have residuals and probably be worth more than it is now." A few moments later, he added, "People will finally appreciate my stupid videos or my stupid songs." It sounded like classic Oliver Tree, funny, self-deprecating, and slightly absurd. Less than 2 months later, those words would feel very different. On June 14, 2026, Oliver Tree lost his life in a helicopter collision over Rio de Janeiro. For millions of fans, the news was difficult to comprehend. Yes, it was sudden, but Oliver had spent his entire career feeling larger than life. He was a musician, filmmaker, comedian, and performance artist all at once. Yet beneath the costumes, characters, and internet chaos was somebody far more thoughtful than many people realized. To understand why his death resonated with so many people, it helps to start long before the fame, long before the bowl haircut, and long before the world knew the name Oliver Tree. Oliver Tree Nickel was born on June 29, 1993, in Santa Cruz, California. It was an environment that suited him perfectly. Santa Cruz has long been associated with artists, musicians, and unconventional thinkers, and Oliver grew up surrounded by creativity from the very beginning. Years later, he explained that both of his parents worked in the circus. Music was everywhere. Instruments lined the walls of the family motorhome, and creative expression was simply part of everyday life. He began learning piano as a young child, and soon started writing songs of his own. What made Oliver unusual was that he never seemed interested in just one form of creativity. Music fascinated him, but so did filmmaking, visual art, comedy, and performance. Even as a teenager, he appeared to be searching for ways to combine all of those interests into something unique. For a period, however, music was not his primary focus. Instead, he became deeply involved in professional scootering. He competed seriously and dedicated years to the sport. Eventually, injuries forced him to reconsider his future. Looking back, Oliver often spoke about setbacks as valuable experiences rather than disasters. He said, "Failure is a positive term. Be prepared to fall on your face most of the time." That philosophy would become one of the foundations of his career. After attending San Francisco State University and later studying music technology at the California Institute of the Arts, Oliver became fascinated by a question that would eventually define his future. Why do some artists become impossible to ignore while others disappear? Those questions led to a university thesis with a title that sounded ridiculous but turned out to be surprisingly accurate. It was How to Turn Yourself into a Meme. At the time, it was simply an idea. Soon, it would become a career. Long before most people had heard of Oliver Tree, he was already experimenting with different musical identities. Before he was the man that most of us now know, he released music under names such as Tree and Criff. The projects explored electronic music, dubstep, hip-hop, and experimental sounds. He was not interested in staying within a single genre, a habit that would follow him throughout his entire career. His talent attracted attention surprisingly early. In 2013, he signed with the respected electronic label R&S Records and released an EP called Demons. Around the same time, he recorded a cover of Radiohead's Karma Police that reportedly caught the attention of Tom York himself. For a young musician still trying to find his place in the industry, it was a significant moment. Yet Oliver never seemed satisfied with simply becoming another musician. While many artists were focused on building a catalogue of songs, he was thinking about something much larger. He was fascinated by identity, performance, and attention. He understood that audiences rarely connect with music alone. They connect with stories, personalities, and ideas. That understanding eventually led to the creation of his alter ego, Turbo. With his bowl haircut, enormous trousers, the weird sunglasses and scooter, Turbo looked ridiculous. That was entirely intentional. What many people failed to realize, however, was that the character was not random. The haircut was inspired by Oliver's actual childhood haircut. The scooter reflected his years as a competitive rider. Even the clothing drew from things he genuinely liked. The character was exaggerated, but it was not fake. In many ways, Turbo was Oliver Tree turned up to maximum volume. Years later, he explained his creative philosophy in a way that perfectly summarized what he was trying to achieve. I want to make something that could be in a museum, but could also be a meme. That single sentence explains much of his career. On one level, Oliver created music videos filled with absurd comedy and bizarre visuals. On another level, he was constructing carefully designed works of performance art. The humor attracted attention, but underneath the humor were genuine ideas about identity, fame, and self-expression. And you cannot argue that the strategy actually worked. Songs such as When I'm Down helped him attract a larger audience and eventually led to a deal with Atlantic Records. Suddenly, Oliver found himself operating on a much bigger stage. Most artists would have become more conventional after signing to a major label. Oliver did the opposite. His videos became stranger. His concepts became more ambitious. His interviews often blurred the line between reality and performance. Audiences were frequently left wondering whether he was being completely serious, completely sarcastic, or operating somewhere in between. That uncertainty became part of the appeal. One moment he would be making outrageous jokes. The next, he would be discussing creativity, loneliness, or personal growth with complete sincerity. The contradictions kept people engaged because nobody quite knew what he would do next. What critics often missed was that Oliver was not creating chaos for the sake of chaos. He was building a character that could capture attention while still allowing meaningful ideas to reach an audience. The joke was never the destination. The joke was the doorway. As Oliver Tree's audience grew into the millions, something interesting began to happen. People arrived because of the character, but many stayed because of the music. The bowl haircut made people curious. The songs made them care. For years, casual observers dismissed Oliver as an internet personality who happened to make music. Anyone who spent time listening to the lyrics quickly realized that that description was incomplete. Beneath the humor and absurdity were songs about loneliness, heartbreak, insecurity, and identity. Tracks such as Hurt, Alien Boy, Jerk, and Life Goes On connected with enormous audiences because they dealt with emotions that felt universal. While his visual presentation was often exaggerated, the feelings underneath were usually genuine. That emotional honesty became even more apparent as Oliver grew more comfortable discussing his personal experiences in interviews. One of the most revealing periods of his career came during the release of Alone in a Crowd. By that point, he had achieved the kind of success that many artists spend their entire lives pursuing. His music had accumulated hundreds of millions of streams. His videos were being watched all over the world. His social media audience had exploded. From the outside, everything appeared to be going perfectly. Yet Oliver described a very different reality. I had amassed millions of followers, but I felt more lonely than ever. It was one of the most honest statements he ever made. The comment revealed a contradiction that sat at the center of his career. The more visible he became, the more isolated he sometimes felt. Fame created attention, but attention was not the same thing as connection. Rather than creating an album about celebrity itself, Oliver chose to focus on loneliness because he believed it was something almost everybody could understand. Most people will never experience internet fame, but nearly everyone understands what it feels like to feel disconnected from other people. That idea became the foundation of Alone in a Crowd. At the same time, another side of Oliver began emerging. In interviews, he started talking more openly about happiness, relationships, and personal growth. For years, he had often used music to process difficult experiences. Now he was also interested in documenting positive ones. A similar theme appeared during the creation of Cowboy Tears. The album explored heartbreak and vulnerability, while challenging traditional ideas about masculinity. Oliver openly rejected the notion that emotional expression should be viewed as weakness. "It's okay for everyone to cry," he said. Simple statements like that resonated because they reflected the same message that appeared throughout much of his work. He encouraged people to accept themselves, rather than constantly trying to fit somebody else's expectations. Looking back, it becomes clear that the characters were only part of the story. The deeper reason people connected with Oliver Tree was that behind every costume and every joke was somebody trying to talk honestly about what it means to be human. By 2026, Oliver Tree had already achieved more than most people could reasonably hope for. His music had generated billions of streams. His videos had been watched around the world. He had built a career that blended so many creative pursuits into something completely unique. Yet, what is striking about his final interviews is how little time he spent talking about past accomplishments. Instead, he focused on the future. On April 24, 2026, Oliver released Love You Madly, Hate You Badly, the fourth studio album of his career. The release represented more than just another record. It marked the beginning of a new stage in his professional life, following his departure from Atlantic Records. For years, he had operated within the traditional music industry. Now he was moving forward through his own label, Alien Boy Records. The decision reflected the same independence that had defined much of his career. Rather than becoming more cautious as he became more successful, Oliver appeared increasingly committed to doing things his own way. Only weeks later, he announced what he called the world's first world tour. The title sounded absurd enough to be a joke, but the tour itself was very real. More than 70 performances were planned across over 30 countries. The goal was to perform on all 7 continents, turning the largest touring venture of his career into another ambitious creative project. At the same time, Oliver was working on something that had nothing to do with albums or ticket sales. That was his new foundation. In several interviews during the final months of his life, he spoke extensively about Dr. Oliver Tree's art grants for baby geniuses. The project reflected many of the ideas he had been discussing for years. He believed artists should be supported. He believed creativity mattered. And he believed that success should continue helping people long after the person who achieved it was gone. "I don't believe that any of the wealth or the things that get made from it is mine," he explained. Rather than viewing his success as something that belonged exclusively to him, he viewed it as something that could eventually be reinvested into future generations of creators. The idea is, when I die, all the money is going to go back to artists. It was an unusually selfless perspective for somebody in the middle of a successful career. Many people spend their lives building wealth. Oliver was already planning how to give it away. The foundation was designed to help artists create actual work. Rather than simply offering advice or recognition, the intention was to fund projects directly and help creative people bring ideas into existence. He hoped the organization would continue operating for 100 years. He hoped artists he would never meet might one day benefit from work he had created decades earlier. Oliver was already thinking about legacy. At 32 years old, long before anyone expected they would be discussing his. By June 2026, the world tour was underway. Oliver had already performed in Mexico and Brazil and was documenting his travels online. Fans followed photographs, videos, and updates that showed him enjoying the experience. There was every reason to believe the tour would continue exactly as planned. Then, on June 14th, everything would change. According to Brazilian authorities, 2 helicopters collided in mid-air above Recreio dos Bandeirantes in Rio de Janeiro. Oliver was aboard one of the aircraft alongside Argentinian YouTuber Gaspi, Lucas Vignale, music producer Lucas Brito Chavez, and pilot Alexandre Souza. The second helicopter was being flown by pilot Charles Marciac. Following the collision, both aircraft fell into an electric vehicle storage facility below. Fires broke out across the site, and emergency crews rushed to the scene. Reports later indicated that approximately 20 vehicles were damaged or destroyed, so the scale of the devastation was really quite huge. And sadly, there were no survivors. News of the collision spread rapidly across the world. For many people, the shock came not only from the suddenness of the event, but from how much Oliver still appeared to have ahead of him. A new album had been released, the largest tour of his career had begun, new projects were being discussed, future plans were already in motion. Then, without warning, everything stopped. And now many people who had previously viewed him only as a comedian or internet personality began discovering a different side of his work. They found somebody who had spent years talking about loneliness and the human experience. They found somebody who had encouraged people to embrace failure rather than fear it. They found somebody who repeatedly urged artists to trust their instincts instead of chasing approval, something that he led doing by example. Perhaps most importantly, they found somebody who never seemed interested in becoming what other people expected him to be. One quote appears repeatedly whenever people discuss Oliver Tree. "If I listened to everybody else, there would be no Oliver Tree." Looking back now, it is difficult to imagine a more fitting summary of his life. The bowl haircut and turbo existed because he ignored convention. If he didn't trust himself, then he would be just another struggling artist. The music, videos, and entire creative universe he built existed because he was willing to trust ideas that other people would have dismissed. He really did gamble on himself. His music videos cost more than they made. That willingness to be different became the foundation of everything he achieved. It is also the reason his work will continue to resonate in his absence. Oliver Tree was never simply a musician. He was never simply a comedian, nor an internet personality. He was an artist who understood that creativity often requires people to risk looking ridiculous before they create something memorable. In one of his final interviews, he joked that people would finally appreciate his stupid videos and his stupid songs after he was gone. And yes, it was a funny line, but I feel like it was also surprisingly accurate. Because now that he is gone, millions of people return to those songs and videos. Many find themselves appreciating them in ways they never had before. The characters may have attracted attention, the humor may have made people curious, but the reason people stayed was because there was always something real underneath. And that may ultimately be Oliver Tree's legacy. I've really loved Oliver Tree for about 5 years now, so this video is something I wanted to make. I loved his ethos, how he held himself in interviews, and of course, his music. Rest in peace, Oliver. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.